Good evening and welcome to the January 12th, 2021 Guilderland Central School District Board of Education meeting. Would you all please silence your cell phones and recite the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under
under
God,
indivisible, with
liberty.
liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so first on the agenda tonight, we have public comment, and we have 3 public comments, and I'll read them out loud. The first one is from the student government. Student government would like to point out the state of the mental health of the students at GHS. Because of remote learning and the pandemic, our contact with other people is extremely limited. This has caused the condition of the mental health of our students to plummet. As representatives of the student body, we feel that it is important to emphasize to you, the board members, that the pandemic is affecting all of us very deeply, and we would like you to consider this when making decisions about the school. A student survey will be sent out in the near future in order to reflect on the first semester. Results will be shared with the school administrators. Thank you for your time and consideration, student government. And Marie, can you share those results with the board too after the survey comes back?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. The next public comment is please continue to support the excellent music programs in our schools. They contribute greatly to our children's health and mental well-being, and even make them smarter in STEM areas such as math. I have witnessed the actual improvement in my own children. The music programs are important to hundreds of families in this district. Sincerely, Helene Treschel. And I apologize if I'm butchering the names here. And the last public comment, we would just like to say thank you so much for all the support you have given to the music and theater programs here in Guilderland. Our children have benefited so much from the music in their lives. We have incredible teachers that have worked so diligently this year to keep the kids engaged and working hard. Our daughter, in particular, has chosen a career with music and theater as the backbone. If our programs at Guilderland didn't exist, she and other students with the same passion would be struggling more than they already are in these unprecedented times. Music and theater have been an outlet and safe place for many students, and the teachers have been doing an amazing job supporting them. Thanks for all you do as a board. We appreciate that you always put students first. Debbie and John Dempsey. Thank you for those public comments. And did we have any more, Linda, come in?
No, we did not, just the 3.
Thank you. Okay, so next on the agenda, we have budget development, and I'll turn that over to Neil.
Thank you, Seema. Good evening.
And I'm going to share my screen here.
Okay. We have a presentation portion of this. Okay. So again, normally, as we do every year, we have an overview of the budget. We start out the budget process in the fall. This is a little bit later than typical to have a starting conversation about the budget. We've had some conversations at the board level, but nothing in depth. And we're at that point now where we wanted to share what we have and what we're thinking. And we've talked about this a little bit in terms of the approach already with the board, but wanted to put some numbers and some information before you. So the first thing we'll talk about is what we're certain of. And what we're certain of is nothing really. There is just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. That's going to be the theme for this budget presentation. We're trying to do budget planning in the midst of great uncertainty. And somehow we have to finish a process that results in some certain numbers that we have to bring before our voters. So what are some of those areas of uncertainty? State and federal funding is the key one. So right now we are really unsure of what is going to happen at the state level in terms of their support of education, and as well as the federal level. We also are very uncertain over whether New York State will withhold up to 20% of state aid to school districts this year. That has been put out there. It hasn't been followed the way it stated it would be with certain timelines for looking at aid reductions and applying them, but that any reduction in the current year will certainly affect the finances of next year. So it becomes an important consideration right now. Like I said, it hasn't happened, but still it's lingering out there and could impact this year, which will ultimately impact next year. A third item is uncertainty around the instructional model for next school year. So as you know, this year, we have implemented a model we've never done before. We've always had in-person instruction. Now we have in-person, we have remote, fully remote, and we have hybrid instruction where students are attending in person one day and remote the next day. So that is a shift from what we've done in the past. And again, what are we planning for next year? Hard to say at this point which instructional model we should plan for. So that's the decision point for us as well. And then finally, still uncertainty over the containment of the spread of COVID-19 and any new strains. So although vaccinations are underway and taking place, which is fantastic, the rollout of that is taking some time. When will enough people be vaccinated so that it is behind us in some sense and will impact how we approach next year? But again, without a clear timeline for the vaccination process and new strains of COVID-19 coming, that's another factor that is creating some uncertainty for us in terms of next year's planning. So we did want to provide some context and assumptions for what we're going to share this evening in terms of budget assumptions. So we do have to pick an instructional model. What we're choosing at this point is assuming that we're going to resume in-person instruction without social distancing requirements that have caused us to limit class size, cohorts, bus ridership, and things of that nature this year. So we revamped our transportation system. We've revamped our classroom structures, the learning requirements, both fully remote, hybrid, and in person. But as a model, we have to select something to build a budget from. So we're under the assumption at this point that there's a good possibility we will return to in-person instruction as normal. And again, without those social distancing requirements to have to work around. Also, as you've heard lately, and there was an article in the Times-Union today about the New York State budget deficit. So the governor has said it's up to, and the state budget director, around 15 billion. Competing source said maybe it's 8 billion, but anywhere between 8 and 15 billion is still a very significant shortfall for New York State, which is primary funding source for school districts. And then there's also talk of a new federal stimulus package. And in that has been discussed targeted funding for education as well as states and localities. So if that were to go through, hopefully there would be additional money for us, additional funding for education directly and additional funding for states and localities that could help with educational offsets as well. But at this point, we don't know if that's going to happen. We don't know what the package is going to look like. We don't know if once it's approved, what it actually means for Guilderland. So again, that is something that we're going to have to take into account as we plan for the budget model, that level of uncertainty and what that could mean for us in terms of overall budget context. So the approach here tonight is different than what we've done in the past. Usually at this point, we'd be doing a rollover budget, and basically we would be making some assumptions based on known information that we have or can reasonably project at that time. We don't have that wide range of variability that I just talked about in a typical year. So the model that we talked about earlier in the year and we've been developing for some budget scenarios is along the lines of a best case, expected case, and worst case scenario. So depending on how things play out in different categories, what could that mean in terms of an overall budget impact? So and these are the larger items of impact here shown in the category section. So staff retirements, and we get salary breakage from that. So we have a senior member teacher, for example, who's worked here 30 years at the top of the salary schedule. When they retire, we'll likely replace them with somebody near the bottom of the salary schedule, some new entrant into the field. That gives us what we call salary breakage. We're going to pay that incoming person far less than what we pay the outgoing person. So that's a benefit in terms of the budget process. We have some expenditure savings as a result of that. So we've looked back historically at how many of those retirements we get in a typical year. And And what we're modeling in this case after is, in a year like this, and we'd like to believe that more people are considering retirement under the pandemic than they ever have before. Best case scenario, we would have 30 retirements, and that would be among our instructional staff and non-instructional staff. What might be an expected case is 20, so 10 and 10, 10 teaching staff and 10 other staff members. Worst case scenarios, we have a 5 and 5 situation where we have 5 retirees that are on the instructional side and 5 on the staff side. But that helps us come up with some numbers around the impact of those particular examples. Teachers' retirement system contribution, and this is the amount the school district has to contribute on an annual basis to fund the teachers' retirement system. They always give us a range, and the range varies. So this year, the range is between 9.5% and 10% of salaries. And that's what we would need to budget for. So best case scenario, it's on the low end, 9.5%. We can expect it might be in the middle, and that's what I would typically do at this time without that information, peg it in the middle. So that's 9.75%. Worst case scenario, we would be at the top end of the range of 10%. Health insurance is another area. So annual contributions and what is our experience like? What are premium rates coming in at? So looking at the overall impact of health insurance, we can expect about 5.5% based on information that we've heard so far. But best case scenario, it's a little bit less than that, 4.5%, or worst case scenario, 6.5%. So those are the ranges that we're working with at this point. And then a big one is state aid. And as you know, we just talked about, the governor has talked about withholding of state aid at various levels. Best case scenario, the state doesn't withhold any state aid and we get our full amount. Expected case, a reduction of 10%. We know the worst case scenario has been told to us. We could expect a reduction of 20%. So we'll put the expected case at maybe a reduction of 10%. So that gives us, again, a framework and a scale to work with in terms of major budget factors and how they may play out in the coming months. So looking ahead, we'll look at our major categories of expense, and we do this every year in the overall budget, and we can look at those impacts in terms of best case, expected case, and worst case. And as you can see the change in numbers, particularly around salaries, we've taken into account those models that I talked about in terms of retirements and how many we might expect from both instructional and support staff. And you can see the differences in the numbers. Best case scenario is a smaller increase than the expected case and certainly less than the worst case. In the benefit area, and that would include something like the teachers' retirement system and health insurance, you can see the same sort of modeling there. What would be the impact if we had those different percentages in play, which would lead to different amounts, and how that would play out in terms of an overall budget impact. Something like equipment, supplies, and textbooks, contracted services, and BoE services, we would apply some general increases. We know the costs increase every year, so we're looking at some nominal increases there to reflect cost of living type adjustments, and that's what we would typically do in this case. So that number hasn't changed. There really isn't any variability there. It would be that cost of living type approach. Debt service, we've also projected out, and that would be the same in all cases. In our interfund transfers, again, we've adjusted that a little bit based on prior year experience, but again, not a big impact in the overall modeling of those. But as you can see from the bottom line, we're about 103 million in our current year. That would jump, even a best case scenario, to a little over 106 million. Jumps a little higher if we look at that expected column to 106.6 million. And then worst case, we're over 107 million. So again, that kind of creates that range of values that we can work within. Similarly, we're looking at projected revenues in the same way. So again, state aid, we talked about best case scenario, no reduction, and expected case a 10% reduction, and worst case a 20% reduction. So you can see based on what we have currently budgeted, we're expecting some lowering of that for next year. And then again, as you go from left to right, that number, the aid number gets smaller and smaller as we're applying more of a reduction that could possibly occur. Local sources, we have adjusted that a little bit in the scenario for varying interest rates on investments. Interest rates are very low, so the changes aren't that significant. But again, that could have an impact on our revenue source there. We have not touched appropriation of reserves and fund balance, leaving those alone at this point, and we'll talk about them in a little more detail shortly. Our property tax levy, and this is a function of now looking at expenses and revenues under those three models. You can see that best case scenario, we're still up that little over $3 million mark overall when we add that tax levy in. It grows to 106.6 million in expected case and 107.1 again in the worst case scenario. So when we look at that, we're looking at some fairly significant increases in the overall budget and then again in the tax levy portion of that calculation in order to fulfill the revenue side of the budget. Our tax levy limit is about 1.56% right now is what we're looking at. So again, that's our threshold for what we would need in terms of a supermajority for a budget. So you can see when we get to the bottom line, the budget adjustments that would be needed to stay within the tax levy limit calculation, we would need to come up with reductions of a little over 2.5 million in the best case scenario, 5.5 million in the expected case, and 8.5 million in the worst case scenario. So obviously we have budget gaps with this model that we're going to have to contend with. And one of the things that always comes up as a question, well, what about our fund balance and reserves, our savings? How could we utilize those? And the answer is, of course, and we have used them up above in the appropriation of reserves and appropriation of fund balance. There's two cautions there. First of all, we have 4 million. Once we start tapping into this more and more without the ability to replenish that, and that would have to come from savings, that money will go very quickly. So say if we apply $1 million next year of fund balance, now what we're saying is we don't have enough revenues to cover our expenses. We need to supplement with savings. There's nothing behind that next year. So we apply $1 million this year, we have to apply another $1 million next year, all things being considered. So within 4 years, we'll have depleted all of our savings very quickly. We can use restricted reserves in a similar manner, but again, restricted reserves, you have to have expenses and you can't exceed the amount of that reserve. So if the reserve is for workers' comp expenses, for example, we can only apply what we have to workers' comp expenses within the budget. And we can only apply as much as we have in expenses. So if we budget $100,000 for workers' comp expenses, we can take $100,000 out of the workers' comp reserve to cover that. But again, once we create that budget hole and backfill it with that 100,000, next year, all things being equal, we're going to have to take another 100,000 just to stay even. If we need more money, then we're continuing to draw down. So the danger there is we have some resources, but you can't replenish those resources. And once you start using them, if you don't have a plan to replenish them, you exhaust them quickly. So that's the caveat here with projected revenues and use of reserve funds and fund balance to balance that out. So again, there's a lot here at play. It's going to be a difficult budget year. Really, again, much uncertainty about the whole process, really. What are revenues going to be? What are expenditures going to be? What are instructional models going to be? All of those issues that we're going to have to contend with. And right now, for the next few months, we probably won't have answers to all of those, but we are going to have to develop a budget during the coming months, and we will work along those lines. So in terms of next steps, we are awaiting a New York State executive budget proposal that typically does come out in January. Haven't heard a timeline for when that might be announced. And I think, again, everybody's struggling with the lack of information now about what may happen at the federal level. So I'm not sure when we're going to have that information, but that's a key piece for us in terms of state aid. We are continuing with the budget development work. So aside from this overview, we're doing the detailed work to continue to develop the budget. So looking at specific expenses, salaries, and all of those sorts of things, that is continuing in the background. We also are going to be asking the community for input, and we'll have an opportunity to be talking about that tomorrow night. Also, as we do every year, legislative advocacy is still an important factor here. This is an unusual situation that we're in, what we had to do this year, what we're going to have to deal with next year in the overall economic environment. So legislative advocacy will be key in this conversation. And then finally, we always talk about when the superintendent's draft budget proposal will be released. It's tentatively scheduled on the calendar for March 2nd. Don't know if that's going to be realistic in terms of the environment we're in, and unless there's some more concrete information that comes quickly. But if it's not, then we'll have to talk about when that might take place, when we will have enough information to share a budget that we can work from at that point in time. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Yes, Rebecca.
Thank you, Neil, for that. I know that we were being optimistic about the fall and not including any COVID restrictions or the inclusion of remote or hybrid learning. But could you speak to just the gross impact if we weren't back to 100% normal by fall?
If we weren't
negative or positive?
That's hard to say, because we've had, for example, on the instructional side, we've had to add more resources because of the mix between in-person and hybrid and having smaller cohorts. By the same token, though, we're having, in transportation, for example, we have less routes, even though we're staggering, we're doing a much more modified approach. It has resulted in less routes and the need for less staff. So in some cases, we have increasing expenses. In other cases, we have some decreasing expenses. And it really depends on how everything is put together. So it's hard to put a number. We would have to look at all of those things. And again, the other consideration is if we have to continue to provide PPE and all of those other things, that has been a huge impact that's somewhat mitigated this year. Like I said, by some of our transportation savings and so on. But these are all things at play that all have different values associated with them, and to the extent to which we're able to do certain things or not is a big factor. So if transportation were to resume as normal and parents didn't drive as much, could we put our 40 to 50 students on a bus? And that's going to change how we do our transportation model. So I wish I had a more concrete answer, but just understand that in some areas we're seeing increases, technologies in another area we're seeing increases where we're trying to push out for remote instruction and so on. If we're in person, we don't have those same challenges. So there's a little back and forth in certain areas.
Thank you. And I totally understand that it's impossible to predict. I just think it's going to be hard to predict by March 2nd,
Yep. And we're looking at, what is our most expensive model. And we're going with the idea it's probably in-person instruction, because we have everybody in-house, transporting a larger number of students, that having students remote at this point does alleviate some expenses within the school district that might come back to us. So that's currently what we're planning for, and we'll have to pick up those extra pieces. The farther along we go, the better idea we'll have of what those extra pieces might be that we have to accommodate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Ben.
How does our budget look this year? I know that we've had to spend a lot more on PPE, and obviously the model that we went to is even different than what we contemplated in when we passed the budget last year. Your cash flow your cash flow charts that you provided occasionally seem to indicate that we're using a lot of cash. So can you speak to the situation that the district's in now, given that maybe state aid may not come through this year, and things like that?
Well, so far, state aid is holding, which is really good for us. We certainly have expenditures in different areas, like I mentioned, technology being one of them, PPE being another. There is the federal money that hopefully we've applied for reimbursement for through the CARES Act, the federal government. So hopefully a good portion of those will get offset and we'll get our money back for those. But again, it's a different model now that we're using. So our instructional staffing is a little higher, our transportation staffing's a little bit lower. We're not using all of the consumables that we've had in the past. It's not been instruction as normal in every case. On the other hand, as I mentioned, technology, we're pushing out more technology than we ever have before. And some of that has been funded through other sources. So we, E-rate and some of those other funding streams that we have for technology. So overall, we seem to be balancing out okay, but we're still at a point where, we're on the edge. We're tight.
I think that it's reasonable to assume that we'll have the 4 million for next year. That's in our fund balance.
I think we'll be close to that. We might have to eat into it a little bit. I'm not so sure that we're going to have to go into it greatly.
Okay.
So again, the typical kinds of expenses that we have in a school year, particularly around the instructional model, haven't been the same this year as they have in other years. So I would say it's a shift. So some of the things that we would normally buy for classroom use have been now taken over by enhanced technology. So we're just spending money in different areas in some cases.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Seema.
I just had 2 questions. One is, after the administration changes in a few weeks, will that make it a bit easier to, I guess, predict how next year will look, or not really? I know you talked about the CARES Act having to come through.
Yeah, I think if we know there's some magnitude to the stimulus package that's under consideration, and we can see particularly, and I know most of us are aware that, the local, state and local funding piece of the first stimulus package was a concern. So a lot of money didn't flow directly to states. So again, with education being heavily funded by New York State, if the stimulus package were to look differently, if there were allocations directly to education, that would certainly be helpful. And if there were more money given to states that could help them as well, that would be good. Now, if you remember what the aid that we got, the pandemic aid from the last stimulus package, was really a swap out by the state. So the state gave us the money that came from the federal government and then turn around and did a deduct for the same amount. So we didn't gain anything in state aid. But the federal money did come in, we did receive it, and the state offset it by an equal amount. So hopefully we will see a true aid increase coming our way, money coming directly into education, earmarked for education, that we could use to help offset our expenses.
And I know we haven't started testing it, but I didn't know if you could speak to how much that would impact our budget as well.
Right now, the testing is won't be a tremendous impact. The test kits themselves, we don't have to pay for, so that's a big part of the expense. Certainly, there's going to be some time involved on staff's part to be able to do this. So the more that we can do in terms of what we're able to do in school while we're operational is going to help than outside of school hours where we have to involve more staff. But right now, there are some expenses with the recording of the test results and uploading into systems that we have to comply with. That seems to be the most expensive part of this. But at least the test kits are free, and that's a big component of what we have to deal with at this point.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can I just say, Neil, that I'm waiting for the year when you don't say this is going to be a hard budget year. I'd like something for you to say, boy, this year's going to be great.
Yeah, I thought the recession that we went through a decade ago was going to be the pinnacle of worst experiences in budgeting, but we're right back at it a decade later. So,
Or we're still at it.
yes.
No other questions? Okay, thank you, Neil. Okay, next on the agenda, we have the consent items, which include the minutes from the December 8th, 2020 meeting, the CPSE and CSE recommendations, personnel action, and textbooks, and then we have financials, which include the capital project financial status report.
So moved.
Barb, you have a second?
Second.
Ben? Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 9-0. Next, for information, curriculum and instruction, Dr. Singleton?
Thank you, Seema. I'm pleased to share with all of you a link to an article highlighting all of the great things that our Guilderland PE program has been doing this year. The article does center around our recent purchase and use of the PLT4M, which is a digital fitness app that provides our students with resources and activities that they can do in PE class at school as well as at home. The article also speaks to all of the great things that the PE program is doing district-wide to deliver quality PE in the COVID world. So I want to thank our PE department for their dedication, their creativity, their very hard work as well, and the link to the article is included for your reference.
Seema, you're muted.
Sorry, yep, I was trying to find the mute button. Thanks. Thanks, Damien. Next, Superintendent Information, Dr. Wiles.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. I have 2 items tonight. The first is a reminder to everyone that tomorrow evening we'll be hosting a panel presentation at 7 p.m. till 8:30 p.m., also live streamed on this very same channel. And the presentation will cover a couple topics, including kind of a recap of the first half of our year in photos. I thought you'd like to see some scenes from around the district since we opened school back in September. We'll also be talking about our testing plans, which I'm going to update all of you on in a moment here. We'll be talking about second semester planning for the start of that, which is on February 1st. And then there'll be a recap of what we just heard from Mr. Sanders about budget development. The program will also include Q&A. We've had over 100 questions already submitted to the district, and we'll have a panel of a variety of folks from across the leadership divisions in our district to respond to those questions. Those watching tomorrow night will also be able to send questions to our reopening@guilderlandschools.net email address if something they see in the presentation prompts a question, and we'll try to get as many of those in as possible. And that will be the kickoff for a thought exchange that we're going to be sending out to our community on Thursday, through which we're going to ask for advice about budget development. Given the uncertainties that Mr. Sanders just described and the challenges that we're all way too familiar with, we're really going to ask our various stakeholders to provide for us some advice about important things to keep in mind as we work through this process. So that will go out on Thursday. And then my second topic, in the interest of full disclosure, when I met with Seema and Gloria on Friday afternoon, they suggested I talk about our plans for doing COVID testing in the school. And I'm so glad I said, well, I'll just provide an update on Tuesday without writing a lot because everything has changed since Friday afternoon. So just briefly to give you an idea of what we're working on and a little context. Earlier in the fall, the governor released a plan called a micro cluster zone plan, which had with it 3 zones, yellow, orange, and red. And each of those had required testing parameters that school districts would need to meet in order to remain open for in-person instruction. Other parts of the state achieved a zone, and many of our neighbors out in central New York and out near Rochester actually went through the zone testing. Well, we've been awaiting our designation here in the capital region, that point in time when we would be declared a zone. Our metrics certainly looked like we would qualify for one, but the metrics themselves have been evolving. And I won't go into all of that, except to point out that we've been in a holding pattern for weeks now. At our last board meeting, the board approved our memorandum of agreement with the Albany County Department of Health, actually Albany County, to be a limited service lab here, which would allow us to test all of our students using the free test that Mr. Sanders referenced from New York State Department of Health. Part of that MOA said that we could not use those free tests until we were designated in a zone. So we've been in this holding pattern until Friday evening, when we heard directly from Dr. Elizabeth Whalen from the Department of Health that we are going to be allowed to go ahead and use those tests. Not as part of a zone, but as a tool to understand what our infection rate is within our buildings. So we are going to go forward with testing our students. Her recommendation was that we consider 20% of our population biweekly. Mary Zwagerman, our head nurse, had put together a whole protocol for what that would look like within our buildings, and she has been speaking with her nurses and planning with us. And so beginning on Friday, we're going to do a soft start at Guilderland Elementary School to run through the testing protocol with a group of students. And then we're going to debrief what that looks like and then ramp up for the rest of the buildings over the next couple weeks. The tests themselves, we have we have 2 videos demonstrating how the test works. We'll share those tomorrow night. The tests take about a minute to administer for each child. It's a swabbing of each nostril. And then the swab actually goes in this little cardboard folder with a reagent in it. And we have a result within 15 minutes, either positive or negative. So we are going to bring down small groups of students whose parents have already consented to this. So this is a voluntary enterprise. No one is being required to do this. And we will get a sense of what our positivity rate is across our district. The other recommendation that was in Elizabeth Whalen's communication to us was if we have a positivity rate around 10%, we should be considering going fully remote. And that's within our schools. So I know on Friday, right before I got that communication, I had put out a heads up to our community that we were contemplating a drive-through model predicated on what I expected to be some urgency to get all the testing done very quickly. But that urgency doesn't exist. And the nurses are actually very comfortable and confident that it would be easier on everyone to do it in the context of their buildings. So we're going to try that out. We had a great meeting with all of our nurses earlier today, and we've been working with Mike Bastian to figure out the data reporting, with our leadership teams in each of our buildings to figure out the logistics, with Amy Perrott to communicate with our families, and all of that is underway. So that was a lot. I'll take questions, comments, thoughts. Blanca.
Were we ever considering an oral swab, or were we always thinking about nasal swab?
Honestly, we were thinking what was free.
Okay. Fair.
We did, however, contemplate the possibility of a pool test at one time. Cap Region BOCES was exploring the possibility of accessing pool tests through SUNY Albany. It turns out, number one, they were quite expensive, and number two, that they weren't going to be allowed after all. So that plan kind of went to the back burner.
Okay.
Is the oral swab better, different?
I was just thinking of the population, kids. The nasal swab is not comfortable, So I thought it would be nice to have the oral alternative, but if we can't make it happen, we can't make it happen.
So I should probably show well, you can see the video tomorrow. The swabbing of the nostrils under this model is not way up in the nostril. It is really the front of the nostril. They do 5 swirls in one and 5 in the other. So one of our nurses, Crystal Varente over in Pine Bush, actually demonstrated with her elementary age son in a video, which we'll share. And he looks perfectly comfortable with it. So
Okay.
anything, we're good.
I had imagined the deep nostril test.
No, we're not. We wouldn't do
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Rebecca, I think I saw your hand.
I was just gonna say, I thought you had mentioned before that it was an anterior nares, like the front of the nose, not the back. So
Yeah.
you answered the question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I don't have any questions, Dr. Wiles, but I just wanted to mention that there are several parents that have reached out, and they said they've been very impressed with the communications from the district and very happy, to hear. And I think they felt that the writing, and they were really impressed with the way you've communicated with families. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I'm sure there'll be more questions, and hopefully I didn't jinx tomorrow night, but I'll be watching. And Blanca, I practiced the nostril test with my kids at dinner time, and because they're getting boosted. What is happening? So thanks, Dr. Wiles.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Rivera. I do appreciate it. A lot of people are really working hard to make sure we can serve our children well, serve our families well, and keep everybody up to speed. And it's a gallop every single day.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thanks, Dr. Wiles. Next, we have board president information. We have a list of policies. Looks like policy has been very busy, A through R. And before they go up for action next time, does anybody on policy want to draw our attention to any of them in particular?
These are just routine that we go through based on how many years it's been since we reviewed them. The only one that had substantial changes was 3200, and we just really folded a bunch of one paragraph policies into one policy. So you'll go through, you'll see there's not a lot of changes except with that one, and all the yellow just means that we added a couple policies into one.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, if there are no more questions, we'll move on to action items and school business. Neil?
You're muted, Neil.
I did say thank you to you, Seema, back then, but was muted at that time. So first item this evening is change orders. So we have 7 change orders representing our 7 school buildings. And they are for bunk-off general contractors, and it's reducing the scope of work associated with the installation of Windows security film. I just want to point out we're not reducing the amount of window film. It was a mistake on the drawings where more film was indicated than necessary. So that's what the adjustment is for.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the change orders?
So moved.
Ben, second, Gloria. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 9-0.
Next is a resolution to amend the Nylath Agreement. And this is an investment pool that the school district is in with a number of school districts as well. allows us to get some very good rates on our investments. And really what this is a merger. There were two parts to the investment pool by two different companies. They've merged together. So really this resolution is just to acknowledge the fact that the merger has occurred and that the two separate firms are now going to be operating as a single firm, performing the same functions for the same service provider.
Can I have a motion to approve the resolution? Blanca, second Judy. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes 9-0.
Next is the appointment of a deputy purchasing agent, and the recommendation to is appoint Heather Hitt to that position effective December 15th, 2020. Normally we would do this at the organizational meeting in July, but Heather just replaced Norma Hennis, a longtime employee, in the position. So that's why we're kind of off cycle with this appointment. So Heather will again be appointed in July when we do our annual appointments.
Motion to approve the appointment. Thank you, Barb. Second. Rebecca, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes 9-0.
Next is a recommendation to approve an emergency contact transportation services agreement with the Raja Group for the period from November 16th to December 4th. This is due to a new student moving into the district, going to a private school that we didn't have as part of a route, but we only needed it for a short window of time that allowed us to find a way to incorporate it in one of our routes.
Can I have a motion to approve the emergency transportation service? Judy, second Blanca. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes 9-0.
Next is the establishment of non-resident tuition rates for the 2020-21 school year, our current school year. These are rates that are developed by the State Education Department through a formula and distributed to all school districts. We don't have these rates at the start of the school year. They need data from the current school year, so it's not unusual that we're approving rates mid-year. So students have been charged an estimated rate. We do have 2 students this year that are attending from out of district. Now that we have this rate, we will make the adjustment and either catch up or get back a credit if they're overpaid at this point.
Can I have a motion to approve the tuition rates? Ben, second Gloria. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 9-0.
Next is the award of printing services related to our capital construction project, and it's printing the final drawings and specifications for phase 2 of our $30.9 million capital construction project. And we're recommending the printing services be awarded to Constructive Copy, the low proposer meeting specifications.
Can I have a motion to approve this bid? Gloria? Second Ben. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes 9-0.
Next is the approval of Dente Group to provide special inspections and construction materials testing services for the second and any subsequent phases of the school district's $30.9 million capital construction project.
Can I have a motion to approve the proposal? Gloria, second Rebecca. Any questions? All in favor? Aye, passes 9-0.
And then finally this evening, I'm pleased to announce we've received some donations from our community, which I'm very happy for. We received a trombone from Mark Ryan, adult cloth mask, face shields and sanitizer for Tanja Menard, and a printer, scanner, fax machine, speakers, and mounts from Lynette Torres. So again, we're very appreciative of those donations.
Motion to approve the donations. Barb, second Gloria. Thank you to the donators. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes 9-0. Thank you, Neil. Next, we have board president action. First, we have a set of policies, A through I. Can I have a motion to approve the policies? Wanda, second Rebecca. Any questions about the policies? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 9-0. Next is the charge to the Equity and Diversity Committee. The updated charge. Can I have a motion to approve the charge? Blanca, second Kelly. Any questions? Ben?
I just have a suggested edit. On the second page, the activities, number 8 is just other with a question mark. And I would just change that to some lawyerly language like, such other activities as the committee deems necessary or appropriate to fulfill its mission.
I'm sorry, where was that? On page what?
On the second page, under activities, number 8 is other with a question mark.
Oh, okay, yeah. And you want to add any other activities that the committee?
Yeah, I would just change that to catch all, such other activities as the committee deems necessary or appropriate to fulfill its charge.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? I think we can add that change and approve it because it doesn't really change the rest of the charge. Any other questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 9-0. Next, we have board committee reports. We'll start with policy.
We had a meeting scheduled for tomorrow, but that had to be canceled because of a superintendent's meeting. So we're rescheduling.
Thank you, Barb. Next, business practices.
We have a meeting scheduled for 8 o'clock Friday morning. It will be remote, and Linda has already sent us a link to that.
Thank you, Judy. Next is audit. Ben?
We have not met since our last board meeting, and we have no meeting scheduled at this time.
Thank you. And communications?
I won't disappoint. We did meet on December 14th. Not much to report except that we did spend a great deal of time formulating that communications with the community regarding, having this meeting tomorrow, the public engagement piece. So that was our recommendation that we go and organize that and that the district provide the panel. So that's going to go forward. We also talked about the thought exchange. That was our recommendation there. So we spent a lot of time just kind of formulating those ideas, and then Marie took them to the administrative team, and then they put them together for us. We also agreed that next meeting we would look at our website and the information that it contains about COVID-19 and determine whether or not there's anything that we're lacking, or are there any things that we need to add to that. And we will be meeting again on February 3rd at 2:30.
Thank you. Lori, is the thought exchange, are you talking about the one to get like a pulse of the district?
Yeah, the one that's coming up on Thursday.
Okay. Thank you. And then now we have the Equity and Diversity Committee update. I'll just give an update. We had our first meeting on December 15th, and we basically had introductions, just 20 people. So Dr. Wiles had everyone go around and introduce themselves. We put together a steering committee instead of having just one person leading the meeting because it's a big group. So the steering committee was put together. There's a student on there, a faculty member, and a community member. Let's see. So from that meeting, there's going to be subcommittees created. That way work can get done, I think, more efficiently. And we're going to make sure that the public knows that they can attend. I've still had people email interested in being involved just this past weekend. So people are still interested in participating. And so we're going to make sure they know they can attend, they can make public comment, they can participate in the subcommittees once we establish them. And maybe next time, either Kelly, Ben, or Barb, if you want to give an update. I think our next meeting is January 20th at 7 p.m. and that's a remote meeting. Any questions for any of the committees?
I would just like to say, I think it's great how active and interested the community is in this particular group. And it also shows probably that we needed to have it, and it will continue to be high in the public's interest and involvement. So I thank everybody who's working on it.
Thank you, Judy. All right, so we'll move on to public comment number 2. Linda, are there any other comments?
No.
No, okay, thank you. And next, we have board issues, ideas, and sharing. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Barb?
Just a question that Damien, Marie, in the future might be able to answer. A few folks have asked about Junior National Honor Society and the Honor Society, because traditionally, at this point in time, kids have been invited, told that they need X number of hours of community service and things such as that. And obviously, we're in much different situation this year. So if somebody could just investigate, is there going to be, you know, National Honor Society, a junior one and one at the high school this year? Or is that going to be by the wayside this year?
Barbara, I can check on that. I do believe they're going forward with it. It's just a matter of what it will look like. But I can check in with Mr. Laster and Mr. Piscatelli. And honestly, that could be a good question for second semester that comes up tomorrow night.
Right.
Marie, you may have already mentioned this, but I just wanted to double check. Tomorrow night, the panel with the questions, that's recorded, correct?
Yes, it'll be recorded and posted to the website. And I just got a text from Mr. Piscatelli that the letter went out today for Honor Society.
Okay.
Any other sharing or ideas, comments, questions? Okay, so I'll have a motion to adjourn. Gloria, second Ben. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 9-0. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.